So in talking about the immune system and vaccines, we kind of need to know what we're fighting. And these are only going to be concentrated on viruses and bacteria. So let's talk about each. Now, a virus is kind of weird. It's somewhere in between a living and a non-living state. It actually can't do anything by itself. It needs our cells to be able to live. So it goes into our cells, inserts itself into the cell's DNA, and turns that cell basically into a factory to produce more viruses. It starts replicating itself over and over and over again until the cell gets so full of viruses that it explodes, releasing those viruses to go invade and get into more cells and make more factories to produce itself. Now, the symptoms of every particular virus depends on what cells it invades. So, take for instance, a vomiting diarrhea illness. That virus is going to be invading the cells that line our stomach, small intestine, colon. Going to be replicating and then causing havoc, and that's going to lead to our vomiting, diarrhea, and nausea. Now, other symptoms you might see, such as fatigue or fever, that has nothing to do with the virus itself. That's our body's response. We're busy fighting or getting dehydrated in this case, and we feel fatigued. The fever is our body's way of trying to increase the temperature to try and kill off the virus. Now, some examples of common viruses are going to be things like the common cold, flu, things like polio, HIV, some terrible things. Now, what happens is when we get these viruses or we get the vaccine, we produce an immunity to keep us from getting again. Now, so why do we keep getting the common cold over and over again? Well, it's not the same cold. There's over 300 viruses that cause the symptoms of the common cold. And so each time we get one of those, we won't get that cold again. But it takes us a while to get all of them. But that is why, as we get older and adults, we're getting much fewer colds than what we did as a child. The other problem is, take for instance the flu virus, it tends to mutate. And so that each year, it's actually not exactly the same virus as it was before. So the immunity that we developed before now doesn't work against that virus this year. Now, the next cell that we have is our bacteria. Now, bacteria are the simplest single-cell organism that's actually considered alive. Now, what it does as far as causing disease is it gets into our body and it can release toxins, which are called toxoids, which can make us sick. It can also cause problems because it's using our resources like our oxygen, or it gets in the way and causes problems and actually destroys tissue just because it's taking over. Or our body is attacking it and creating pus, which can cause problems, such as pneumonia or if you had an abscess. Common examples of bacterial infections would be like the bacterial infections that cause ear infections, pneumonias, sinus infections, meningitis, things like that. Now, the problem with bacteria is that you need antibodies or antibiotics to fight it off. Now, antibodies are what our body naturally produces. The problem is sometimes the bacteria is so aggressive that our body doesn't produce it fast enough. That can lead into problems like death. That's the reason we use antibiotics. The problem nowadays is that some of those bacteria are becoming resistant to our antibodies. And that's where the vaccines come in, that we can prevent ourselves from actually being sick. Now, the vaccines themselves work in different ways. With viruses, we could use a live virus that we weakened so that hopefully it didn't cause disease. This is going to be true of viruses like measles or chickenpox. We can also use a virus that we just killed, and we put that in the body so it's incapable of causing disease, but our body still recognizes all the parts and can produce the antibodies against it. This would be something like polio. And then we can sometimes use little pieces of the virus that our body would recognize. With bacterial infections, what we use is different things. We use, some way of recognizing the toxin so that we can deactivate it so it can't cause us to be sick. This is going to be for bacteria like tetanus or diphtheria. We can also use a coating, a sugar coating on top of the bacteria and recognize it. That's going to be like for the bacteria Haemophilus influenza B. Or sometimes it's just a piece of the bacterial wall, such as whooping cough. Commonly, people think that bacteria are much more severe than viruses. But as you can see, that's not true. We can have something as deadly as the plague on the bacterial side, or something equally as devastating like HIV on the viral side. They both can wreak havoc. And our vaccines are trying to keep those things from happening as much as possible.